Now in my direct, age range relation, my cousin, a guy named Jeff Turner, who actually was the production designer on Boggy Creek, the series, and a few other things. He was the first kid before me that wanted to go to like art school. He wanted to go to film school. He wanted to do all this stuff. And Jeff is a genius when it comes to building things, creating things with his hands, which these things are worthless on me. I mean, like, I spend, like, I buy a new couch, and after 2.5 hours, it's basically assembled, and I am so angry and sweaty that there's no point in going on. So, but he can build anything. He built from the Scarecrow and all the props and almost all the props in Boggy Creek, the series, to the set on my show Popcorn Fodder. He built that stuff with his own 2 hands while I watched and, pretended I knew how to hammer a nail in if he asked me to. So, and he's the only other like extremely creative person in my direct family. Otherwise, that was kind of the weirdest thing, deciding I wanted to be in show business, was that there was just no example. Especially on my father's side. My father just thought I was insane, reckless, whatever negative words. He just was like, "What? You want to point cameras at stuff? Nah, that's not how you do it." My mother, on the other hand, was always obsessed with the idea that I should be happy. Nice. Which really is helpful, because my mother never wanted to push me in any direction. She just wanted me to go in a direction I wanted to go. And I think, she got a little lucky in a way, having a kid that kind of knew what he wanted to do when he was like 14 years old. Because I still have friends my age. I'm 33 now. I still have friends my age who are like, I don't know what to do with my life. And I'm like, and I get it. I don't blame them. There's so many options, so many things, so many paths to take. But I pretty much was like, by the time I was 15, I was like, just hand me a camera and I'll figure it out.
So, Henrik, let's start. Where did you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I'm from Dayton, Ohio. And actually, that's where I live right now, is in Dayton, Ohio. I spent a few years on the East Coast working, and I spent all my summers and most of my Christmases in New Hampshire with my father. But overall, I am a Midwest boy. I say ope. I'm so polite that it makes people uncomfortable. It's just who I am. So, and I like to think that my aw shucks nature accidentally bleeds into all my work, and maybe that's one of the bonuses of it.
That's funny, knowing the genre that you participate in most frequently, that's the case. Were your parents artists at all, or where did you think you got your artistic flair from?
That is a fascinating question, because I'm from a relatively uncreative family, and I don't mean that in a majorly negative way. It's just my mother is a business professional. My father was a factory worker. My mother was never extremely creative, but the one thing my mother did have that was a major bonus for me was she had hustle, and lots of it. And that's something that has really helped in my career a lot, is knowing how to hustle and being willing to hustle. I remember, being 5 or 6 years old, and my mother would work part-time at the mall, full-time at her office job, and sell Mary Kay cosmetics and Tupperware on the weekends. She was always ready to make life a little bit better by hustling. I did have some singers. My great uncle was a very famous gospel singer. I would reference the songs he wrote, but I really don't think this is the audience that is going to know his work. I mean, and not just because they're not religious, but also that they're, probably under 60.
Yeah,
So, but so he was the only showbiz person in my entire family. He toured and played music and stuff like that.
So where did this love of film come from? You said you early on that you decided you were going to just point a camera at stuff and go for it. So where do you think you film? Why did you gravitate towards film? What was it about it?
Man, growing up, I was a pretty lonely kid. Didn't have a lot of friends. And when I was I was always obsessed with movies from the time I was very, very little. I just, was watching movies, watching TV all the time. Was the third parent, and I would watch movies and get such a kick out of it. And I remember by the time I was about 9 or 10, all I wanted in the entire universe was a video camera. That was all I wanted. Now, unfortunately at that time, that wasn't really in the cards. I came from pretty humble beginnings, and we couldn't buy a camera. But remember how I said my mom was a hustler?
Yeah.
She's a hustler. By the time I was about 10, we'd moved into the suburbs, we bought a house, and things were starting to really look up. And I'll never forget, I was 12 years old, and my mom was like, we're going to Walmart and we're getting that camera out of layaway. And I was like, oh my God. it was this full-size RCA the VHS camera, and I wanted a full-size VHS because I wanted to film something and then immediately pull the tape out and shove it into the VCR and watch it. I didn't want any time between. Which is not much has changed. I'm always about instant gratification. But the moment I got that camera, I would film everything. I'd film my mom's little poodle dog running around and goofing off. I would put a camera on a tripod and plug it into the television so I could see myself and just kind of, act out little skits or whatever. I went completely bananas with that thing. I was so obsessed with getting a camera prior to that. There used to be this thing called the Nickelodeon Movielodeon or something. The camera, they had a camcorder that they sold, and it was really, really cheap. It was like $250, which was very cheap because I think the cheapest camera that, like the one I got, I think was like $600 back then.
Yeah.
The reason it was so cheap was it didn't have a viewfinder. Like you had a viewfinder, but it was like one of those cheap photo cameras. You just saw right out it. So it gave you a rough idea of what you were filming, and it didn't have its own recorder. You had to plug it into a VCR and hit record on the tapes. So it wasn't that great of a deal, but it was nice and cheap. And I wanted one of those so bad that I used to record the commercial and watch the commercial over and over, thinking about, like, when I get this, what will I? And it was in black and white. But so anyway. So I get the camera and I immediately start filming everything, and I start plugging the camera into my VCR and doing like some rudimentary editing. And, I was talking to somebody about this a few months ago, and I realized how terrifyingly focused I was for a child. Like, I would sit in my bedroom, and like 11 hours later, I had like a 3-minute video that I had made by hitting record and hitting play and stopping it and then rewinding it and doing it over and over again. And over the course of like a summer, I figured out how to edit some little videos together. I figured out how to plug my CD player into the audio input so I could create like kind of sort of a terrible looking music video, because it was like 5 generations of dubbing. And I became obsessed with it. But the big turning point, the moment that it probably all really came to be, was I was watching television, and I was still about 12, maybe 13. And I'm watching TV, and there is this live call-in improvisational comedy show on the community access television channel 23 at the time.
Wow.
And so I'm watching this, and I'm like fascinated because, it's being filmed nearby. It's live on TV, and you can call in. So I called in, and they ask you, give us a place, give us a name, improv comedy stuff. So at the end of it, though, since it was a live show, they needed breaks, and they can't show commercials on community access. So what do they show? They show PSAs.
Yeah.
And one of the PSAs was like, hey, do you want to make your own television show? Call this number and find out how you could take classes and blah, 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 blah. So the next morning I dialed that number, I called, and I was just like, do you guys have an age requirement? And they said no. So I was like, great. So I found out how much it cost, and it was like $30. It was nothing. So I called my mother at work and was like, Mom, you got to drive me to these classes. I got to sign up for these classes. I want to learn how to make a TV show. And I didn't know at the time, I was the youngest. I wasn't the youngest person to ever take the classes, but I was the youngest person to ever have a show where no adult was actually like producing the show. I had become a certified producer at 12 years old and started producing my own show. Now they were unwatchably bad. They were just, it's kind of like when you watch like a really early stand-up, it's like you have the delivery but the material's not there. It was kind of like that. So I had nothing to talk about and nothing to videotape, but man, I could do it. I could definitely videotape. So I would do these shows on cable access, and they would air on real television. It was crazy. And that was when the bug completely bit me. I also ended up meeting my mentor there, a guy named Andrew Kopp, who was the only person I ever met at that point who had made a feature film. He'd made a movie called The Mutilation Man, which of course he would not let me watch because I was like 12. but he was very encouraging, and he was always talking about making movies, and he would work Saturdays. So I like lived at the community access station on Saturdays because they opened at 10 and closed at 6. So my mom would drop me off at 10 o'clock with like, $7 to get lunch. Because I would ask one of the people who worked there when they went to get their lunch, I'd be like, could you grab me a hamburger too? Like 12-year-old latchkey kid. And I would just hang out and work on whatever show was in the studio or edit on my show. And Andy worked those days, and he would like sit me down because it was usually dead. Most people have a life. They're not going to sit and make a cable access show on a Saturday. So I would hang out with Andy in the edit room, and he would just like hands-on, one-on-one teach me like, this is how you set your in point. This is how you set your out point. And he would watch my edits and be like, that's not a good edit. You want it to be earlier, or you want it to be later. And that was the beginning of my film education. And from then, I was just completely and utterly addicted to videotaping things, editing it together, and showing it to people. And that's been the thing I've been most obsessed with, is getting people to watch.
Yeah.
Because I think part of that might be because the first things I ever did just went on to television. And I put an email address on those shows, and boy, did I get hate mail. So hello everyone, my name is Henrique Couto, and I'd like to welcome you to my Christmas special. You see, I wanted to do something special for everyone this Christmas season, and not only did I release my EP with The Legend of Flannel Bear, You'll Be Sorry, but I also put together this little television extravaganza featuring some local musicians, some local television personalities, and of course, myself, because I'm a media darling and that's the kind of thing I do.
How did you gravitate toward the horror genre? Where did that emphasis come from, and why did you so vehemently decide that was where the direction you wanted to go?
I think a lot of it had to do with one of the great elements of the horror genre, which is the fandom. In the horror, there's a horror community. There's not a comedy community. There's not a drama community. Right. There's a science fiction community, and I'm a humongous Star Trek fan and have been since I was very, very young. So what ended up happening was I noticed that if I talked about horror movies on like AOL Instant Messenger or whatever was, the way you talk to people on the internet back then, I noticed that if you talked about like Evil Dead, you made friends.
Yeah.
You'd make friends talking about Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and stuff. So that was a big element. Because I loved horror movies since I was very young. I had a sister who was about 7 years older than me, and she gave me her Freddy Krueger VHS tapes when I was like 10, and I was terrified of them. I would spend an entire weekend like building up courage, and by like Saturday night at 9 o'clock, I'd be like, I'm going to watch Nightmare on Elm Street 1 again. Because I'd watched it like once all the way through, and I would always stop it because it got to me too much. And then I'd like chicken out halfway through and be like, all right, it's only 10 o'clock. I'm going to watch Nightmare on Elm Street 3. I can get through 3. I can handle 3. 1's too scary. So you know, it was always kind of ingrained in me that horror movies were awesome. And I mean, you could see like I have my Pumpkinhead 2 poster in my office and stuff like that. I love I've always loved horror movies, and that's what's kind of drawn me in. I'd say, you know, depending on the year, my total output of artistic work is probably 70%. Maybe a little higher, maybe a little bit lower horror, and then the rest is split between drama, comedy, you know, all the other stuff, all the other genres. So that's what drew me in. And then I was a goner, a lifelong horror fan the moment I went to my first convention and got to meet those friends I had made.
Sure.
You know, and then all of a sudden I was like, I have a community. I have a place where people want me around and where people want to, you know, maybe even watch what I'm making. And I got to say also, they were incredibly kind. I mean, you got to remember people are walking up to my table at these conventions and they're buying a DVD from a teenager that they know is of a movie made by a teenager. And then they have the audacity to the next show tell me that they thought it was really fun and they look forward to seeing what I'm going to do next.
That's awesome.
So I mean, I'm still thankful to this day. I have fans, like I have a Patreon, and on there, you know, it's very like direct communication. Anytime you comment on anything in there, I comment back immediately. And one of the people on there, I mean, he's been buying movies from me since I was 15 years old.
Wow.
That's awesome. I'm blown away.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So with that element, I don't imagine that you ever thought at some point, I mean, you acknowledge now that these were bad films or films that, you know, you necessarily wouldn't have put your stamp of approval on where you are now, but
yeah, they had something to them, but yeah, they were rough. They were rough.
So I can't imagine that you ever thought about conventional means, like, you know, going through film school or going to Hollywood and trying to pitch something. Was that ever a thought for you, or did you just continue doing this and, you know what, I'm on this path, I'm just going to keep walking?
I never really considered it. I always thought that Hollywood was getting antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
And I still do think that to some extent. I mean, like Boggy Creek, the series is a great example. Los Angeles producer hires a guy in Ohio to make the show because he doesn't want to pay what it's going to cost out there. So I never considered going to LA. There were like brief moments where there were like kind of opportunities to maybe go and intern in Los Angeles. I ended up interning on the East Coast instead.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I grew up, like I said, I grew up in, you know, kind of humble means. I grew up in a situation where like the idea of working in show business was kind of like in space. It was like, what? You want to work in show business? How do you even do that? My mother did want me to go to film school, and I was very opposed to it. So, and I'm glad that I turned her down. My mother, I can't overpraise her. My mother was willing to mortgage our house to send me to film school. So, I mean, you can't really beat that much support. But I decided that it wasn't for me, and I'm glad I didn't have her waste her hard-earned money sending me to a place I didn't even really want to go to. You have to build it yourself. And that's why I make movies for a living. It's not because someone told me I could. It was because a lot of very kind people told me I could by supporting my work over years and years of building. And I work under a complete, you know, a business model that is pretty much entirely my own device. Mm-hmm. So, you know, honestly, and if you'd ask me, you know, I've been working for myself for 5 years. If you'd asked me 6 years ago, like, when do you think you'll be doing this full time? I don't know. I hope by the time I'm 40, I don't know. And little did I know that a year later, a crappy boss with no genitalia was going to fire me, and it was going to make me realize I don't need nobody.
Nice.
This one is really important to keep in mind. You know everything because you really kind of know nothing. And what I mean by that is you know a lot because you've been working at your creative endeavor for so long. I've been making movies for 14 years, and I've been doing it 5 years entirely professionally. And one of the things that kind of evens the playing field is that I, who have been doing it for over 10 years, and someone who's been doing it for 30 years, we know a whole lot about the film business, but we also kind of don't know anything. Because the wind can blow away that you're not expecting, and all of a sudden everything is completely different. There have been many days in the last 5 years where I have woken up on a Monday morning, gotten a phone call, and found out my entire business was now completely different. And if you can't roll with those punches, you're not going to be able to roll with this gig. But if you can roll with the punches and always pivot, maybe you can rock and roll it.
Came into a time too. Your first film credit on IMDb, which I'm sure is not your first film credit, but maybe close, was around 2003. So you came into an interesting time in the filmmaking industry, especially for indie filmmakers. The digital revolution was just beginning.
The DV revolution.
Canon XL1s were the thing, and everybody was getting into it, and everybody was starting to copy that and realizing that, hey, we can get as close to film as making a film as possible by making it look like a film and actually having it be a film. And, you know, because I came up at the same time. I started making films in 2000, so I know what was going on in that industry at the time. And you know, it was still a little bit on the fringe and frowned upon to do that. But for guys like us who are making low budget projects and things like that, it was a godsend. I would imagine you believe that as well. And so talk a little bit about your journey through that and how much that helped you become a full-time filmmaker, because I have to imagine that was a huge part of why you became successful.
Oh man, the DV revolution. You know, it's something that I don't feel like people talk about enough. You know, there are two. I've lived through two, in my opinion, humongous revolutions in independent filmmaking. That's the DV revolution and the DSLR revolution.
Oh yeah, sure.
Those are and both of those are why I'm sitting here right now, because they both made a huge impact on my career. When I was 15 years old, they started selling these mini DV cameras for like $500-600. They didn't look the best, but you could just plug them right into your computer and then you could capture it, and there wasn't a bunch of bull crap. You know, it was an incredible way to have nonlinear editing streamlined. So I got the little camera, and then I got my mother to loan me the money to buy a Macintosh, because I believed, and I still believe, I mean, now it's not as big of a distance between Mac and PC as far as professional work. But back then, I mean, pros used Macs in the video world. So I wanted a Mac. They were expensive, but I convinced my mother I could start making the payments somehow. I just had this feeling I would make money if I had the Mac. And I wasn't wrong. So what happened then was I had this Macintosh, and I could plug in, you know, the FireWire, and I could edit in iMovie and eventually in Final Cut Pro. And I also started learning how to author DVDs and all this stuff. And what happened was I became obsessed with making a package to sell my little movies on, you know, so that they could be just like in you know, home video, because I loved buying DVDs and flipping through and picking all the extras and stuff. I was like, well, how do you do that? And if you went through iMovie, you couldn't make a DVD with extras. You could only make a DVD with like a play and a one other thing. So I learned how to author, and then you know what happened? I found out a bunch of filmmakers had no clue how to do that, and they started hiring me like crazy. And that was how I paid on that computer. In fact, when I was 16 years old, I authored 4 movies that were in Blockbuster Video because I was the cheapest option.
Nice.
I was undercutting my competition because I'm 16 years old. So I remember signing the contract for that job, and my mother had to co-sign it because I wasn't even legally allowed to enter a contract yet. And that's been something that has been helpful for a long time, has been knowing how to not only make a movie, which is something you learn over, you know, years, decades of trial and error, but also how to package it, how to do deliverables and things like that. That was the beginning of me learning the technical aspects, because the technical aspects can be learned. Period. The creative aspects are the part where it's like you've got to have that spark kind of in you. I think, I don't know if it can be learned necessarily. So if you have stories you want to tell and you know how to tell a story, you can figure out how to use a camera. You can figure out how to edit a video. You can figure all that shit out. I mean, granted, it may take you 10 years, but.
And it really should, though. Don't you think that it should? I mean, because the technical aspects, there's so much involved: lighting, sound. I mean, if you're learning all that, that's a knowledge base that should take you quite a while to absorb.
Oh yeah. Well, and you know, when I was in my 20s, early 20s, I wasn't really that confident in myself as a DP, and I actually had a roommate who learned how to, you know, light things at New York Film Academy because I was living on the East Coast. Nice. I learned so much from him. And it was so funny. One day I was just 3 years ago, something, I was lighting something, and all of a sudden I stopped dead in my tracks and went, man, I am doing so much more than what he taught me by like 1,000,000 degrees. Like, holy crap, I've DP'd like 20 something features, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, and that's one of the things, one of the things that have helped my movies so much is I'm a very meticulous DP.
Nice.
And I DP all of my films, even if it says that I didn't DP that. That's just because some people look down on someone directing and shooting. So I changed it. It's funny. So the first film that I changed it and gave the DP a fake name, immediately people started, raving about, like, you could really tell that they had the time to focus on it while you were doing your other things. I was like, yeah, that definitely wasn't just a fake name. That was an amalgamation of two of my favorite fictional characters. Yeah, that Eddie Barnhart is a real guy. Yeah, that's what happened. Eddie, and he's a good guy too. I like him. Yeah, I've seen him naked in the shower. But it's funny how that's a whole other conversation. But about how the way people see things changes their perception.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like one of the reasons when I make movies, generally we keep the budgets relatively secret, and we always keep the shooting schedule secret. Because, the moment they hear, like, oh, you shot that in 5 days, all of a sudden they're talking like it's crap, even though they just told you they liked it. And you're like, oh, it's because nothing makes any sense and nothing matters. I got it. I understand. But
especially back then, that wasn't a badge of honor back then.
No, and it's still, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to me and you show me a movie and I'm like, hey, that turned out pretty well. And you're like, we shot it in 4 days. I'm like, hell yeah. That's how you do it. That's more time you can spend with your loved ones, man.
In our costumes and laughing and getting candy, and then she was gone.
Guy with the white face.
His entire head is white.
Tis the season.
Watching me from the back of the crowd. You wanna storm out of the room and say you're standing so proud. I see your eyes paralyze every person around. It's pretty obvious that later on it's gonna get loud. I don't know what you want me to say. It doesn't matter 'cause you never listen anyway. You tell me up, tell me down.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Have you ever read the Bible?
Oh! So I'm gonna do the stereotypical friend thing, and I'm gonna let you sleep on my bed, and I'm gonna sleep on the couch.
Just share your bed with me.
I just prefer the couch.
I don't fart a lot or anything.
What?
I'm not a gassy woman. I'm not gonna stink up the bed and keep you up all night. Is that what you're worried about?
No.
Are you sure? 'Cause I seem to remember you telling me that your wife was a night farter.
I have never uttered the term night farter.
Good Lord, Charlie, it's me.
That was just a warning. Make yourself known a little sooner next time.
Isaac Brown is dead. Mason and Holland both too.
Well, I'll not be the next marshal. Doesn't seem to be a long-term job from what I can see.
As it happens, I was elected sheriff recently.
Huh. So I guess you're out here rounding up a posse to hunt down the man what killed Sheriff Brown, huh?
Well, as it so happens, Al Milagro is dead by misadventure.
Good Lord, the devil is thirsty in Deadwood, ain't he? So what are you hunting me up for?
I'm going to capture Calamity Jane.
skeptics, myself included, have dismissed the Jersey Devil.
Where are you? Maybe it's coyotes.
When the sun goes down, these woods become very, very scary.
Fear is your #1 enemy out here.
Gonna go home.
Sometimes I look up at the moon, and I wonder, is someone else looking up at the same moon at the same time with me? And do they wish they were dead too?
I could never do what you do. Creating stuff for other people? I'm not trying to put you down. I mean, I wish I could sell out.
She just left out of nowhere.
Was it really out of nowhere?
We were happy and then she was just gone.
I know it's been hard, but I got something for you. When I fractured my elbow, I drank 2 glasses and I didn't feel shit.
You slept through most of your suicide watch. How do you feel?
It was an accident.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Are you embarrassed because you didn't succeed? Is it because it wasn't a very manly way to die? You must have changed your mind since you called 911. Do you feel like a coward?
I know you've been going through a tough time lately. It's on Twitter.
Of course it is.
Did you try calling her?
She wouldn't answer. So I'm just gonna have to find her when she's out.
Stalking is a slightly better idea than killing yourself, but only slightly.
Hey, baby.
Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you!
Are you upset because she doesn't have a penis? Does it make you feel threatened in this environment?
You don't have a penis either.
Don't act like you know me.
So do you want to have sex?
Yeah, sure. You're supposed to be there for me. You're supposed to be my friend. Now you're just a fucking bummer.
You.
You gotta live with the fact that nothing good ever happens.
Would you still love me if I wasn't an artist?
Probably not.
In the backwoods of Arkansas, along the banks of Boggy Creek, a local legend tells of a strange creature, a giant of the woods, half man, half beast. And now, the American Yeti Project has sent a research team to investigate the beast of Boggy Creek.
Was your plan from the beginning to gather a portfolio, to just make mass films, or was it just that you were doing it? And is there something to be said for that approach as a filmmaker? Do you think that's the best way to learn how to do your craft? As we were saying, as you get on more sets and you do more things, you start to pick things up. So was that the intent for you from the beginning?
I've always been a quantity person in everything. I mean, you should see what happens if there's a plate of chicken wings in front of me. It's a terrifying sight. So whether it's, you know, a plate of chicken wings or how many movies can you make in a lifetime, I am ready to break a record if I can, you know? So, I mean, I always wanted to be on movie sets. I always wanted to be helping out. And when it comes to my own productions, I always had this sense that I wanted to be prolific. But I mean, I wasn't really that prolific. And now, see, you're going to hear me be all judgy about how little I did by the time I was 23. And that's obnoxious to most people. But to me, by the time I was 23, like, why wasn't it 10 movies? Why didn't I have 10 movies done? I only had 3. Why was it only 3? Because I was lazy. You know, that's the way I feel. But so, you know, I made a few movies and I learned a lot. And the biggest thing that happened for me was, I would say it was maybe by the 4th or 5th movie maybe. When I started out, remember I said about you can learn technical, but you can't learn the other stuff. You know, it kind of has to be a part of you a bit. If you would ask me when I was like 19 or 20 years old, after I made like 2 movies, hey, what's your favorite part of the process? I probably would have said like, oh, you know, like camera work, or I probably would have said editing, or, you know, one of those tech things.
Yeah.
Because I was learning how to do it and I was getting good at it and I was very proud of it. But, you know, fast forward 5 years later, if you ask me, hey, what's your favorite thing? Or even today, if you ask me like, what's your favorite part of the process? I would say it's directing. It's sitting down with the actors, making sure that we're all on the same page to do a good job, choosing the way the camera is, you know, pointed, you know, picking the shots, and then managing the editor, you know, managing the collaborators. That's my favorite thing. So that's why I direct so many movies. And that's why I produce so many movies too, because producing and directing, very similar hats.
Sure.
Not exactly the same, but very similar, especially if you're working with somebody who has a little bit less experience, because then you can step in and be like, well, if it helps, if I were directing this scene, I would do this.
Right.
And then you just step back and let them do their thing.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if you're not a total shithead of a producer, then you want the director to actually direct his own movie. Once I realized I loved directing, then all of a sudden I was like, well, then I better do it as much as I can. And after I did a little movie called Depression the Movie, which was my first comedy, and which was very shockingly successful. I was distributing it myself, and I couldn't keep DVDs in hand. That movie single-handedly got me out of like severe, dangerous credit card debt, which my prior movies had gotten me into, and really, you know, made me start to go, maybe I have a career. And right after that, I got hired to make Babysitter Massacre, and then I never stopped. Since then I've made at least 2 movies a year. There is one year, 2018. That looks like I didn't make a movie, but that's because I was making a TV series I couldn't talk about the entire year. So
nice.
People were writing me. I was literally like no sleep, out of my mind with stress, working on Boggy Creek, the series. And people fans, whatever, would write me and be like, you know, it's really cool that you're like taking a second for yourself. Because I couldn't publish that I was working on a television series. So I'd be like, well, I'm working on stuff. I'm not just hanging out.
Nice. Did you have personal stepping stones and goals, like at this point in this, at this film, I'm going to be doing this, or I want to achieve this on my next project? Were you thinking about that at all during the time that you were making so many films?
Early on, like before I really went full tilt and boogie, I was definitely thinking that way. But what I've realized now is the best thing to do is get the movie done, get the movie sold, and then, you know, move on as fast as you can. You know, once the movie comes out, you know, you promote it and talk about it, and, you know, things like that. But otherwise, like, just forget it exists.
I'm curious for you, because you do know you're going to shoot it or you're going to make it. When you're writing a script, is there a certain freedom in that, you know, you're going to have the camera shot in your head, or is it more of a burden because now you're going to have to kind of express what's in your head out to people, and doing that through a script is often not frowned upon, and it's not exactly the way to do it. So your writing process, has it changed and evolved because of that idea that you're going to be the one making it?
So yes and no. The interesting thing about writing, so I probably write about a fourth, as far as like type out the screenplay, I write about a fourth of the projects I do. Now, as far as development and stuff, that's different. I'm involved because I have to be. I mean, I should be. But actually, directing other people's work takes a lot more brain power, because I don't have that like second sense of what they wrote that I do because I wrote it. So, you know, I'll be looking through the script because we have it to shoot the next day, and I'll be like, holy crap, this is in there? I read that, but I didn't remember it. And then I have to worry about trying to, you know, capture the essence of the written word, but also put in the essence I want in there as well. when I'm directing my own stuff, honestly, I feel like I can kind of be a little lazy, like because I put the hardest work in the script.
Nice.
To make sure it was what I would dig, because like I said, there needs to be a collaboration element. The best part about filming a screenplay you didn't write is that the stuff in the script is something you would have never written or you would have never thought of. Otherwise, why not just write it yourself? So I've gotten to a point now where I give myself all the easy work. When I write a script, it's usually something like Making Out or Awkward Thanksgiving or Nothing Good Ever Happens. It's always like these really personal stories that are usually crowdfunded, so I'm answering to no one but my fans.
Nice.
Where I can do whatever I want, have fun with it, and be done. Because as much as I enjoy writing, and I do have a very strong creative mind for coming up with concepts and stuff, sitting down and tapping the keys is really difficult for me. I want to wander, I want to get into things, and I want to get around, I want to make calls and do all that work. Sitting and typing it can be really challenging for me. I need to work on that discipline a little bit. See, a guy who's directed 16 movies is like, I got to work on my discipline.
Yeah,
it's the worst. No, I know how awful I sound, because you a fan of Warren Zevon, the musician?
Sure, yeah.
He died of lung cancer, and there's a documentary where they followed him around like right after he got his diagnosis. And he said something that really blew my mind, which is he was talking about how they were recording an album while he was, terminal, and it was coming together so fast. It was almost done and all this stuff. And he was like, if I had that kind of motivation when I was well, I really could have done something. He had like 21 albums.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're sick. We're sick in the head. That's what it comes down to.
There is a disease that you do get as a creator like that. Yeah. I totally relate to that. Absolutely. 100%. I'm curious, do you remember the first scene you ever directed and produced, and what do you remember vividly about some of the first things you ever did?
If we're talking like childhood stuff, I remember, oh man, wow. Wow. I was with two of my friends, a guy and a girl, and we were at a playground by my house, and the camera was on a tripod, and we were all vampires. We all had like cheap vampire fangs in. And we were just saying stupid, quirky stuff we thought was funny to each other. And then at the end, we had to put a cut into the scene, because this is, of course, this is the first thing I ever did. I didn't understand coverage at all. But I put a cut in the scene because we forgot the cue, because my friend, I think his name was Danny, was supposed to fall off the swing set at the end. So we put a cut in so that then he falls off the swing set, like from a different angle. And that would probably be like the first scene of scenes that I ever directed that I can remember, at least.
Awesome. So when do you feel like you really found your groove filmmaking wise? What project were you saying, okay, I'm in this to win this?
I think it was Depression, the movie. Because there was a lot of pressure on that movie, because that was the fourth film I'd ever directed. And the three previous were all, I think, turned out really well, but I'd had a lot of problems with producers, with partners on them and stuff like that. And it got to the point where I was like, do I even want to do this? This is such a pain in the ass. Like, do I even care? So I ended up saying, and falls into that point I made about the DSLR revolution being so incredible. Mm-hmm. I finally was like, you know what? I'm just going to I had made a couple $100. I was like, I'm just going to take this money and I'm going to buy a Canon T3i, which was like $550 brand new.
Yeah.
It was all the money I had in the world. I was like, I'm going to buy this camera. I'm going to make a movie that's going to be whatever I want. And this was the first time I did a movie that was entirely from soup to nuts, whatever I want. It kind of set the tone for movies like Awkward Thanksgiving and Making Out. But I was like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want. So I came up with this thing called Depression, the movie, which was just a comedy about all the sad things I could think about. And I was like, I'm gonna make that movie. And you know what? When I'm done, if I didn't love doing it, I'm just gonna sell the camera and I'm done. I'll just figure out something else to do with my life, I guess.
Look into his eyes. They're the eyes of a man obsessed by sex. Eyes that mock our sacred institutions. Bedroom eyes, they call them in a bygone day.
So what do you want to do?
I should leave.
They're the eyes of a man whose lust knows no bounds.
And I'm like 23 or 24. Yeah. And so I shot the movie, and I had such a great time every day, even on the shitty days. I had such a great time on that movie. And that movie was literally financed like out of my pocket. Like, the cast and crew ate a sack of McDoubles for lunch, and I would stop filming when I just didn't have any money in my wallet. And then 2 weeks later, when my minimum wage job paid me, I would go back to filming. Yeah. And in fact, most of the cast in Depression the movie were people I met working at a Spencer's Gifts. Because I was working at a Spencer's Gifts. Yeah, there are some very attractive women that work at Spencer's Gifts. So, but they ended up being like a lot of the supporting cast on that movie. And that was the movie where I started to go like, you know what? Even with nothing, I can tell a story I really like. And I mean, there were scenes, important scenes in the movie where I was literally standing by the camera right here, holding the boom and looking through the screen, and we had 2 lights, like that was it. And I loved every minute of it. So that was when I started to think, you know what, maybe I'll just do this again. So, and it was like kismet, like I said, the movie got me out of debt because a shocking amount of people showed up to the premiere, and a shocking amount of people wanted to buy copies. And then on top of that, I got a call from Michael Rasso at Alternative Cinema, who had distributed 2 of my prior movies. And he was literally like, yeah, it's cool what you've been doing. So when are you going to make something I could sell? And that's when we began the deal to make the first Babysitter Massacre movie, nice. which was the last independent film on the shelves of Blockbuster.
Wow.
So yeah, crazy. And I'm literally working on the sequels to Babysitter Massacre right now, which we kickstarted last year. Okay. So yeah, we're shooting 2, 3, and 4.
I'm wondering, having done so many films now and being your primary DP, are you someone who is done developing shots? Do you edit to camera more often than you don't? Or is it the exact opposite? Is it now I'm going to need this cutaway and that cutaway, so I'm doing more shots?
I believe that if you want to make movies quickly and efficiently, the best tool in your toolkit is to be confident that you got what you need and you're moving on.
Nice.
Is to be sure, my favorite thing is least favorite thing, honestly, but on a set is when an actor goes like, are you sure we got it? And I'm like, yeah, I was looking through the thing. Let's move on. Like, yeah, I got it. No, I don't know. Yeah, I got it, man. So when I'm DPing my own work, I'm definitely I know exactly what I want. And it's also, it's by schedule too. Like I'll shoot a very simple 1-page, 2-page dialogue scene, and, we'll get a 2 and we'll get 2 over the shoulders. And then I'll look at the clock. And if the clock says we got another 15 minutes, I'm going to try to get one more piece of coverage to just kind of spice it up. Yes. But if the clock says we're almost barely on schedule or we're like 5 minutes behind, well, then we're moving the fuck on. I mean, that's the way to do it. So, and I've tried to like spice it up a little bit. Like one of my new things I've been doing is keeping a B camera on a gimbal just on standby, so that whenever we have like a really emotional scene or whatever, we can start with a pull in or end with a pull out, or do both, and then let the editor and myself decide later. Nice. And that stuff just adds like a nice little tiny bit of chrome.
Yeah.
Just a little bit different from what I used to do. Cause I really, when I produce a movie, and I've produced, 20 something movies, some of them my own as director and some of them, not as a director. But I did like 2 films with John Oak Dalton, who's a screenwriter I'd worked with, one called Girl in the Crawl Space and another one, the upcoming Scarecrow County. And one of my rules is when I produce, I also DP. That's like part of my major investment in the project is I show up with all of my gear and all of my expertise and I film it, because I know that if I film it, it's going to pass QC and we can sell it into distribution.
Sure.
So that's what I did with Girl in the Crawl Space, with Scarecrow County, and with Babysitter Massacre 4. I was there. Thank goodness, Dan's such a talent. He put everything together, but then when he told me the dates that were to shoot, I drove my happy ass up to upstate New York and I filmed the whole thing for him.
Nice.
And I was able to be his backup. Like I said, if something happened or we started to fall behind schedule, I could lean in and be like, I would fucking do this if you want to make your day. And we had a rule, an agreement early on, which was that if he was more than 30 minutes behind schedule, that I took over as director until he was back on schedule. And it only happened once in all of the production. It only happened once.
Mhm.
He just fell behind just enough, and we only had like 7 shots left in the day. So I literally grabbed the camera and told the actors, follow me, and we got it done. But he was on every other time beside that, and he didn't take it personally because he is a mensch.
Now you did a series prior to Boggy Creek, so I'm curious though. The Boggy Creek seems like it was a bigger production. It was a more scaled production. So what were your trepidations into going into that, and how did you manage to get past that? And what did you like about filming the series process?
Well, I will tell you wholeheartedly, I should have had some trepidations that I was sorely lacking. I did not know what a bigger challenge it would truly be.
Okay.
If I knew now what I knew then, it would have taken half as much time, and I would have required half as many prescription medications. So I jumped into the project, and I produced the first half of the show pretty much by myself, which was the first huge mistake. I should have immediately hired a producer to help me. But I was used to doing so many features without a producer to help me. I figured, why not? But there's a lot more moving parts. There's a lot more elements you have to keep track of. You have to keep track across episodes. You have to worry about being as efficient as possible. We also just had some little elements of like curse to us too. Like we booked a bar location and then they went bankrupt, you know, and then we had no location anymore. And it's like, well, we got to find another one. And then we found one and they were like, we can give you 6 hours on a Sunday. And you're like, fine, things like that. So, I mean, would I do it again? I absolutely would, knowing now what I know. It was a fascinating experience getting to build 6 episodes and build these characters and establish who they are and have there be little hints in every episode that give you more about who they are every week. That was really probably the most fun element for me, was developing the 2 main characters' relationship.
Yeah.
And it's cool. We did the show in a way that you could watch it out of order if you wanted to. So there wasn't like a perfect arc. And because of that, if you watch it in one order or another order, you still get, these pieces gradually revealed to you.
Nice.
Just in a different way, in a different order. The only thing I wanted to do I wanted the finale to feel a bit more finale-y. So we did have the moment where they kind of almost kiss in the finale, but so, I mean, I honestly, beyond that, it was mostly like making a film. It was very flattering to get hired to do Boggy Creek, the series. Fred Olin Ray hired me. I was his pick to do that show. And Fred's a legend in movies, not just in independent movies and B movies. I mean, the man has directed over 100 films. He works in television. He works in direct to video. He's done theatrical. He's done everything. And he is a plethora of knowledge. Very, very helpful producer. He's the kind of producer that looks at your scripts and actually says, like, I think you could do without all of this because it'll just give you too much trouble. Because he knows. He knows. As to where a lot of producers will be like, well, you'll figure it out. Bye. And then they're gone. Fred was very hands-on. He wanted us to have everything in our back pocket to do the best job we could. A good example would be Brink Stevens being in the first episode. That was Fred. Fred was like, I'm gonna send you Brink Stevens for the first episode.
Nice.
So, like, not only did he send us Brink Stevens, because we had a budget to work with. Not only did he send us Brink Stevens, but out of his end, he paid for her day rates and he paid for her flight. All I had to do was put her up in a hotel. So he saved our production a lot of money. Like, he didn't demand we put a name in the episode and then diminish our budget. He wanted us to have the best shot at doing a good job on every episode.
That's awesome. That's a great producer.
Dude, for real. I mean, he's very opinionated but he's earned it. He's earned it. And I always listened. So that was the most incredible experience, was just having like the phone conversations with Fred Olin Ray, of him telling you what he expects. He gave me this incredible like rundown of what makes a movie look micro budget. So to avoid it all. And it was stuff that like seems obvious, but also that was brilliant. I mean, it was stuff like, what is the haircut of the cop?
Yeah.
It was stuff like that. He was like, the cop can't have shaggy hair.
It's all in the details, right?
Yeah. It's in these little details of like, you can't, it's fine if the cop is your friend, but they got to cut their hair or they look like they're just your friend, And that stuff was really helpful and very eye-opening. And honestly, because the Boggy Creek series, I mean, we spent a really long time working on it. So my other TV show, which I was a producer and the host of, Popcorn Fodder, actually, I made that, almost a year after we wrapped Boggy Creek, but it came out first. And that show, I mean, I learned a lot that I used from Fred. One of the biggest ones being just like, everybody needs makeup, even if you think they don't. And I was like, man, that's okay. We'll figure that out. But after shooting Boggy Creek and always having a makeup artist on set, I don't make any movie now without a makeup artist on set. Yeah. So, I mean, the things I learned, they went on into the films I made too. I made, and not just as director, but as producer as well. That's one of the reasons I think Girl in the Crawl Space turned out so well. And it's in national, international distribution right now. You can rent it on Amazon Prime. You can rent it on Vudu. You can rent it on Fandango now. You can buy it on DVD. It comes out February 4th on DVD through Mill Creek Entertainment. It's, and that was a first film for the director, but I was able to help us make the best possible movie. Yeah. And one of the elements of that was taking a lot of Fred Ray's advice to heart. And I get it. When we were talking, I could tell he's used to people going, yeah, and then not listening. Cause I get that too. I'm dead serious. If you are a filmmaker and you get a hold of me on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, I'm easy to find. I'm the only one with my name that speaks English, it seems. You find me on any of these services, and you write me an email and you ask me like for advice on how to sell your movie or how to whatever, I will give it to you. I really will. It's not a secret.
Yeah. That's the great thing about the community at large.
Yeah. But I will tell you that almost nobody ever listens.
Yeah.
They ask me all these questions and then they go, well, I mean, I guess that's one way to do it. I'm like, you asked me because I guess I'd done a little bit more than you. So why are you telling me? The worst experience I ever had with that was at a convention at Horror Hound Weekend in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I was in the middle of making Calamity Jane's Revenge, my Western, and I'd taken a weekend off to do that show. And while I was there, a guy walks up to me, a guy who has made a couple of movies as a producer, not as a director, but he's made a couple of movies, a bunch of slasher movies. None of them had managed to break out in distribution or anything, because at that time, slasher movies really were not being pulled forward into the market. Gotcha. Just at that time, this would have been like 2016 or 15. I can't remember.
The marketplace was exhausted by them.
Yeah, and it was just soft on that stuff. It still is a little bit, but they're starting to be more open to slasher movies now. But so he walks up and we're talking, and he's like, "I heard you were making a Western," and I was like, "Yeah," and he was like, "Wow," and I was like, "What do you mean, wow?" And he was like, "Well, I mean, there's not much of a market for that," and I was like, have you looked at Walmart? There are 5 new Westerns on the shelf every week. What are you talking about? That movie made me a lot of money.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it did. But that guy walked up to me, just know-it-all-y, having not researched anything. And I was like, I didn't ask you to tear down my business, homie. Like, come on, man. There's a saying I have, because I try to be very positive, and I try to talk to people very honestly about what I do. And whenever people say like, I don't know if I could do this or whatever, I say, well, the whole world's going to tell you no. And if you join them, then you're never going to do anything.
Yeah.
So you got to say yes to yourself. You got to say, yes, this story is interesting. You got to say, yes, I can make a show. You got to say, yes, I can just friggin' tape the microphone to the door if no one's going to hold it. You have to be the one to have the balls to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you do that stuff, you'll be pretty happy. I mean, now, I have 3 people hold the microphone. That's not true. That would make no sense. But
one guy holds the cord, one guy holds the actual mic, right? So
yeah. And then one guy is a lookout for what I don't know, but he's looking.
Don't step on the cord. Nice. That's awesome. So IKEA is your enemy then?
IKEA is without a doubt my enemy. But at least I always get a smile out of how they name their furniture.
Right.
But yeah, no, when I hear some assembly required, I immediately think, what friend would come over and for pizza do most of the work? I actually I put some of the ornaments and the lights on my Christmas tree last night all by myself, and I am amazed that it's still standing. So
That's awesome.